Well, why don't we go ahead and get started so she wants to give a short presentation and then we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. Welcome to the K through 12 chat today. And if I might ask, make sure if you would, especially while Amy is presenting, if you would have your Zoom set to mute so that we won't have any outside noise during our presentation. So I want to introduce Amy Hogan. Amy is just a wonderful math and statistics teacher who currently is teaching at Brooklyn Technical High School in New York City. She is a Math for America Master Teachers, and she's also currently serving as our ASA, the Section for Statistics and Data Science Education High School Fellow. And we are really fortunate to have Amy with us in this role. And Amy has just graciously volunteered to lead the group today on reviewing for the AP Statistics exam. And so with that, Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. As Chris said, I'm Amy. I'm teaching AP Statistics this year and have been for quite a while. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about like what I might do to get my students ready for the AP Statistics exam. And I was kind of thinking about like, why do I want my students to take the exam this year? Because it has been a year for all of us. And so I think the thing is I'm focusing a little bit on the reward of it. You know, if students are working hard, I would love for them to get college credit or advanced standing, or just to be proud of themselves. And certainly students who do not want to take the AP exam, it's not going to bother me. You know, in my school, we usually have all students taking the exam. So when I do review and in general in my classroom, I focus a lot on some of the points that are in this book, Make It Stick. If you haven't read it, it's really good. I just finished reading it again this week, actually, and I did it on audiobook, and the audiobook is, I think in total, it's maybe 8 hours. If, you know, hack tip, if you listen to it at 1.25 speed, it's less than 8 hours. So it's kind of a nice way to think about learning and remembering and memory retrieval. And I think it's kind of like formed a lot of things that I do in my classroom. The key thing being you have to mix it up. So whatever I tell you, you know, like one thing is not enough. You got to try to get the kids to mix topics, mix studying techniques, and really practice that way. Frequent practice, effortful, spaced out over some time is better than obviously cramming the night before the AP exam. So what that would look like for you is different. You know, I would say 2 to 4 weeks. Like 4 weeks is generous, and that would be even if you were mixing it into content, like new content, that would be fine. 2 weeks is probably like you know, you'd be doing only a review. So those are the kinds of things that I think about. And really, you want to give students opportunity to just generate ideas, reflect on mistakes, and be challenged. Right? So I'm certainly going to give my students things that are going to really challenge them. And then hopefully when they get to the AP, they're like, oh, that was easy, because I haven't made it seem too simple for them. And I'm going to praise, especially this year, effort and perseverance. So, you know, having kids, you know, make sure that they go over things that they don't understand and really try to, you know, make sure that they're going over their mistakes. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is there are different formats this year. So the traditional exam, paper and pencil, the first 2 administrations of the AP exam, May 17th and May 25th, are going to look like the traditional exam. So it's going to have a part 1 with 40 multiple choice. The students will have 90 minutes for that. And then part 2 for 5 free response questions and an investigative task. So I don't know if you guys know about the investigative task, but that kind of something that you can't really prepare students for other than the format. So in the normal year, I would tell my students 10 to 12 minutes for the regular free response questions and full 30 minutes for the investigative task. And that's more than other people I've heard recommend. But I really feel like the 30 minutes is a good time for students to think about the question, explore the topics on that question. And the time works out very nicely for 12 minutes for 5 free response and investigative task for 30 minutes. So that the timing works well there. And then this year, we're going to have a digital version of the exam on June 10th. And that exam, the students will only be able to type their answers like through a keyboard. They won't be able to upload photos or anything like that. And that particular exam, the part 1 is going to look the same. It's still going to be 40 multiple choice and 90 minutes. But part 2 is going to have 11 multiple choice. And this is something I had to look up. So, the specifics of it were not necessarily clear to me until I looked it up today. So 25 minutes they'll get for those additional 11 multiple choice questions. And then separately, they'll have 3 free response questions and an investigative task. So similar format for the free response and investigative task than a traditional exam, but really different format. And the key thing is that students won't be able to go back to questions. So on this particular app that they're developing, they're going to, once they've answered a question, they can only move forward. Okay, so that's something to consider and certainly something to think about. And so I think of like sort of 5 different types of practice. So, thinking about the exam format, kind of like what I was just talking about, getting students aware of what that format for them will look like. The statistics content, obviously, what they're going to be tested on, question types, communication, and then the calculator, right, which is required for all students, even those taking the digital exam. So in terms of the exam format, like if you are taking a regular paper and pencil exam or a digital exam also, you might want to give a mock exam. I know we have done that in the past. There are several secure exams that you can use for such purposes that you can access through the College Board website using your account. And so you could do a full one. We've done it after school, we've done it on a Saturday. And I don't think that we're going to have any time or resources to do that this year. Or you could give something like a practice exam. And I've done this for a final exam where I give 20 multiple choice, 2 or 3 free response questions, and then an investigative task. And usually, I'll explain that in a minute. The free response questions are ones that they can prepare for. They'll know in advance what those might be. And so you can do that. I've done it where we have 40-something minute periods usually, and I would do the multiple choice on one day, the free response on another day, and then maybe the investigative task on a third day. So that you could do that in a digital format also for if you're remote. And then specifically for the digital format, the students are going to have like a keyboard on the app, and I've been told that the symbols that they will need to type their responses will be on that keyboard. So certainly something students that are taking the digital format will want to practice what that looks like. And they have said that in early April, they're going to release, I guess, some questions for students to practice on. And last year when they released the practice question, I said to my students, like, this is something you should really pay attention to, because you should practice that I could pick from. There was one, I guess, what would you call it? The interface. You really want to practice what the interface would look like so that you kind of understand what you're up against and what it feels like, and also for your own device, what that would feel like. So I certainly am going to have my students do that because my students are taking the digital platform. So in terms of content, I mean, there are lots of ways that you can have your students learn the content. I always suggest to my students to take a practice test just to figure out where your weaknesses are and where students can grow. I really don't think students have a good sense of places where they're always weak. They'll say, oh, I know it. And then you give them a question and they're like, okay, never mind, I didn't. So kind of having them evaluate for themselves where those sorts of places are that they are going to need to focus on. AP Daily videos are available on topics. Other AP Stats teachers have recorded those videos, and they are, I think they're labeled by unit and by topic. So that's something that students can study with. I personally love the Against All Odds videos. These are a video, also free. I'm going to put it in the chat for the link for those videos. Those are scripted videos, again, based on a particular topic. I think there's about 30 of them, and they're really good. The person who presents, Party Sabetti, is a researcher, and she also is very good at explaining statistics. The vocabulary is wonderful. And what I like about the videos is there's a context to the video. So they go through kind of a story, they go through the vocabulary, and they go through the different ideas and sort of some of the math with it. I really like them, and my students absolutely love these videos. I assign them kind of as a review during the year, but that's something your students could use too. And I think there are activities related to those videos. I love suggesting to my students to have them create a graphic organizer for a unit or chapter. Let's say you give your students a practice test and they see that they are really struggling with probability. I would tell them, hey, do your graphic organizer on the probability unit. Diagrams, vocabulary, key ideas, maybe some formulas that they are struggling with, maybe some calculator commands of like what they would need to enter into the calculator. I think those are really good. Having students just write an original problem for a unit or a chapter. And actually, this is one of the ways that I write assessments. So I give my students pretty free rein, like you're going to write a problem on a 2 proportion z-test. Any topic, anything that you want to do, you just have to write the scenario and you have to solve the problem. And if you want to make it a little more challenging, you can add constraints. So you could say something like your p-value has to be between 4% and 6%, and make it challenging. If you're having them write something about unit 1, you could say, I want you to create a problem where the average is between 20 and 22 and your data is skewed to the right or something like that. You can have them have constraints. It makes it kind of fun too. I also love Larry Green's website, Categorizing Statistics Problems. So there's no problems to do. It is simply like a scenario. I'm going to put this in the chat too. So the interface allows you to select what topics you want for inference. And then there's a scenario that pops up and the students have to choose what inference procedure would apply to that problem. And what I really like about it is it gives you feedback, like if students get it wrong, it gives really good feedback. And they're just kind of, they're fun scenarios. And you can do that with your students or they can do that on their own. And then of course you have the option of review books. Most of them are probably about $10 to $20, depending on what it is. I personally don't think that the version matters, but I do know some of the newer versions focus on some of the, like current parts of the AP curriculum. But really, if students want to get used review books, I never complain about that. And the StatsMedic review course is also available. That is a cost per student. So I don't know if students want to pay for that or if schools want to pay for that, but that is not a free resource. But it's organized by topic, and there are multiple choice questions, there are videos, there are practice questions, and then there's also like a practice test, kind of like what I was saying before, that the students can do. And the interface is pretty easy and it's self-paced, so students can do it in their spare time. So in terms of multiple choice, AP Classroom has, I looked today, over 500 public multiple choice problems, and then more practice questions if your students have a locked browser. So they're secure exams. And what I like about the website is, and I really haven't used it that much, is that you can select topics, you can select how much they mimic the AP exam, you can pick questions that like all have a graph or have some sort of motivation with a picture. And then in my classroom, I usually give power quizzes. I don't know what I'm going to do this year. So honestly, I haven't thought it through in terms of with remote and hybrid instruction. But what a power quiz in my class looks like, and a lot of teachers in my class for AP classes do this, is students get 5 multiple choice, and either they're working in a group or they're working solo. And again, I like to mix it up. And they answer those 5 questions, and it's scored live. So like I am scoring the students' questions as they're doing them. And I usually do something like this where it's out of 10 points. And if they get the question on the first attempt right, they get 2 points for that question. Second attempt, they get 1 point, etc. And the students really like it because sometimes, when students get things wrong, it's like they're really trying to choose between 2 answers. And the questions and the discussions that students will have in their groups are really, really great. You'll hear them arguing about them. And if I'm doing this for a grade, I try to make it not like out of 10 points, I'll make it out of 7 points, because this way it gives them a little incentive to get questions right. But if they get a question wrong on the first attempt, it kind of gives them a little bit of wiggle room. But this year, I don't think I'm going to be doing like any graded quizzes. I think I'll just be doing ones for fun. And I did 2 tests worth of questions. So I did 16 days of this, and I just do it every day. It's just how we start the day. The Barron's review book has good multiple choice, in my opinion. I think they're actually quite challenging. But I really love the flashcards. And what I like about the flashcards is that you can shuffle them. And so just like I was talking about with the mixed review, students they have to automatically, first things first, they have to think about what topic it is with the multiple choice. So it really does a good job mimicking what the AP exam might look like. In terms of free response, I really love just having my students practice past questions. And I usually like to give an investigative task or 2, just so that they see like what they could anticipate in terms of the challenging topics. And certainly I like my students to think about the intent of the question, the model solutions, and scoring rubrics. I think it's really interesting, like for them to see how we as AP graders are going to be scoring them, like what types of things we're looking for, where we want the emphasis, and it kind of helps students to think about what might be important. So here's what it might look like in a particular year. In 2019, this is what I gave my students. So I got this idea from Josh Tabor, and he basically does something very similar. So I gave my students in 2019 20 free response questions that I like. So you'll notice like these might be some of your favorites too. I give them the year, the question, and then like the little, little note about what it might be on. Notice I don't give them the topics, right? So it's mixed topics. And I do this because I think my students, they're a little overwhelmed when they go to the AP website, and there's just like, dozens and dozens of free response. And in my opinion, some are better than others. And what I like about these are they're good problems, they're good to practice. It will cover the entire curriculum. And most of them, I really like the rubrics. So I think that most of these, I think to myself, this would be a rubric that a student could follow. And if I'm giving a final exam, what I will do is I will pick 3 randomly from this list. So theoretically, students will have had every single one of those multiple choice problems to practice beforehand. And I like picking my favorites. I like being able to go over my favorites. Some of these I also was the grader for. So to be honest, grading them is much easier when I sort of have graded it before. And then I also like to do with free response problems. Sometimes I do like we read it together and then we plan our responses. We don't actually answer it. So students can, talk about what the topic is, if it's an inference problem, what procedure, if they're going to need to use their calculator, what function they would use, and they can practice talking it through about what functions and how that would work on the calculators. They can talk a little bit about like what, things they might have to communicate. So sometimes this is a nice way to like not do something, but do it at the same time. And then I also give my students, I call it just the stems. So what I will do, and sometimes they're real AP problems, but sometimes they're ones that I've just made up, where I give just the scenario and then the students have to write the questions. So they have to think, like, if I'm reading the scenario, what questions might be asked for this? That's an interesting take on it. In terms of communication, I like Bob Lachelle does this thing where he has students assemble the model solution. So what he does is he takes the model solution from a past free response question and he like cuts them up and adds extra things. And then the students have to mix and match and decide what the model solution will look like. And he's even, like, one of the problems, he created a Desmos activity. So I'm going to put that in the chat. So there it is, planned for you. But it's nice because students still have to think about it, but they have all the pieces there. They just have to put it. And there are some red herrings in there, so you do have to think about that. And then for calculator instruction, I really love Leah D'Orazio does the open intro videos for the TI calculators. And they have a playlist of videos for calculator functions. And she goes through like all the functions with a problem. And then I love it because students can go back and rewatch the videos and learn how to use the calculators that way. So kind of nice things. So that's what I have for you guys. Anybody with questions?
Feel free to ask Amy questions or put questions in the chat.
Any other ideas that you guys can think about?
Could you move back to the previous slide just for a moment?
Which one?
The one right before the end.
About the calculator playlist?
Right.
This one?
Yes, I just wanted to.
Oh yeah, I put the link for the playlist in the chat.
Ah, there it is. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Amy, I was wondering if you had questions or had ideas, or if anybody else does. So I'm entirely online.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering, with regard to those questions that are in the lockdown browser,
Yeah.
can we use those? Like, what's a good way to do that? Because my kids are asynchronous 2 days a week.
Oh yeah. So I am not planning on using those.
Okay.
And you know, I looked at the questions today, to be honest with you, because I also wanted to see what was available for my students. But I'm kind of feeling like 500 questions is enough to pick from. And what I was thinking of doing is kind of like I was doing the power quizzes. I would just randomly select 5 questions for them to answer a day, right? And so, you know, I mean, with 500, I think that's plenty. I don't need more than that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing now with homework. It's like, it's their regular homework, and then they've got 5 random multiple choice to go
Yeah.
through. Okay.
But it's good. It's good. I mean, listen, it never gets old for me to answer questions, even ones that I don't even think, like, I would never write that question, but that's the sort of the practice. Is like, I'm not writing the multiple choice questions. So even if it's not something I would want to answer for my students to answer, it's, you know, it's fair game. And again, because it's coming from College Board, I feel like, you know, those are questions that are good to practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mary Lou, you said, can we get those 20 free response questions? Yes. If you email me at alittlestats@gmail.com, I will send that to you. That one, I'm going to go back to this just to show you. That one was from 2019. You'll notice that, like, a lot of those questions are more recent ones. So like last year, I gave my students a similar list with the truncated curriculum, but there were some questions from 2019. I can't remember which. I didn't even look it up, to be honest with you. But then my 2021 version will probably have some of those 2019 questions on there. So I sub them out because there's no, on each of these questions, it's usually a topic or 2 topics. And so if I pull in one question, one goes out, you know, it's equilibrium. So yes, if you want to email me at alittlestats@gmail.com, I'll give you this list. Okay. Aaron's asking me, have I used StatsMedic? I have used StatsMedic. So my students used it last year, and my students will use it this year also. I think that for my students, because kind of like Allie's students, a lot of my students are remote only. I think it's nice for them to have something that they can do on their own pace. So this way I'll know that they have that available to them, but I certainly don't think it's a standalone. And partly because it's kind of like what I was saying, I like my students to do mixed review. So I would want to mix it up, but I do like it. I mean, listen, if you have the monetary funds to do that, I absolutely would say go for it, especially this year.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because my district did purchase it for us this year, but I've never used it before. So I have it, and I'm just not sure. I haven't dove into it yet, but I'm just was curious about any thoughts on how to use it. I'm still in curriculum. I have a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
We're a semester only class, so we're sprinting our marathon right now.
Go
But
for it.
I just can't decide how I wanted to structure it or use it. And I just didn't know if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, so I would say less structure is better for that website. And maybe I would have students check in with you. Like, what have you done? That's sort of how I'm going to do it, because I think this year I really want to focus. You said you're asynchronous. Did you say that, Erin?
We're a hybrid.
You're hybrid. Okay. So if you're hybrid, what I would do is when you have class, I would do something not StatsMedic. I mean, listen, they put out an email on Sunday, like advice how to use it. I haven't read that yet, by the way.
Me neither. It's unread in my inbox.
Okay, so maybe I would say go read that email. But what I think I'm going to do is leave that for my students to use in whatever way they want. And then I will structure the things that I want, because this way I know what they're getting, and I know what I like, right?
Okay.
And I think that StatsMedic is, for my students at least, I think I'm going to leave it as if they want practice. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the way I'm going to use it this year. Last year we were asynchronous, and that was like a really good resource because I didn't have a way to get my students in one space at one time. And so having it self-paced was really great.
Perfect. Thank you.
But the students really liked it. So that's the reason why I did it again this year for my students.
Perfect. Thank you.
And you can ask me more questions like as we get further in. So Chris, you asked me, can you clarify the use of language in calculator speak? Okay. So calculator speak, no. I don't allow it in my class. I think that students should have good communication for what they're doing. So let's say, like, for example, you're saying versus drawing, and your question is long. So versus drawing a normal distribution and what folks need to include during a free response. I always feel uncertain what the expectations are. So when I have my students, I think you're asking me about inference, Chris, is that?
Yeah. Sorry, it's kind of a two-parter. The first
fine,
part,
all right.
the first part dealt with specifically questions that are asking for certain probability in context of some sort of normal distribution, and whether they should draw it out with like a line and shade an area versus just put it in the calculator. And then the second one deals with what specifically the readers are looking for during inference.
All right, that's a two-part.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, part one, probability, no calculator speak. What I like for my students to do is to tell me what distribution they're using, like if they're using or formula they're using. So the way the rubrics are usually written is it's by formula or by name, right? So let's think about that. So let's say a student is doing a binomial problem. The way I would have my students do it is they would write in an inequality like, what's the probability that X is greater than or equal to 3? They have to write that. And then maybe they're using a binomial. And so they're going to tell me, I'm, binomial distribution, and then the parameters. So N is equal to 12, P is equal to 0.4, and then they can write the answer. Now, some of my students love formulas. They are not my children. I personally don't like formulas. So I really appreciate the binomial, listing out the name and just making it clear. And then with the normal model, usually the rubrics like for them to find the z-score. So, hey, we're going to find a z-score. And then, a diagram would be nice, right? So in terms of the notation, there have been varying ways that the rubrics have looked at them. Generally speaking, they have to be labeled. So you can use notation like capital B and then, N equals, P equals, but you have to say N equals, P equals. As far as I know, that's what they want. So I think the thing that students need to understand is that it needs to be clear, right? So if it's like riddled in code, that's not always clear, like even if they think it's clear. And so that's really what I emphasize, is it should be really clear to the reader. Okay, and then in terms of inference, it's the same idea. I have my students write one proportion z-test. They don't get to say one prop z-test in my class. They have to say one proportion z-test. That's a shortcut. Because I don't like to emphasize having the formulas. I think that's not as important as the explanation. And so if they say one proportion z-test, what they have to report is the z statistic and then the p-value. So it's kind of the same idea, right? Like if they're using a calculator, they have to sort of let the person know the plan for what was put into the calculator. I think that's really important for communication. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And if you're
I
asking
don't-
specifically for inference, they're looking for a title or a formula.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for you to define the parameters.
Yep.
They're looking for you to go through the conditions and clear them.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for the test statistic. They're looking for the alpha. They're looking for the p-value. And they're looking for a conclusion in context. This is for a test, not for interval, but to conclude about the HO and the HA and how it affects the HO and HA separately. And one of those two needs to be in context.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the key thing is the context. And that's sort of maybe, Chris, the point when kids are using calculator speak, none of it's in context. Right? So it's really making it clear.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
Part 3. So in this same conversation, I mean, what I've been doing is giving students prior practice or prior exam questions, and then in groups, they're kind of grading each other's questions with the rubric, right? And even them to try to understand what a 4 or a 3 and looking at the differentiation and kind of going through the score report where they see the different questions and why the reader chose to grade one at each. How do you, hopefully our students are able to self-assess their own performance during their question and understand what they need to include. What have you found is best to have them know that, okay, I know this is a 4 if I did it correctly? Because my students are leaving points on the board frequently, right, where they know the answer and they're not specific enough in their responses, and maybe they're lazy in their solution. But I just curious what you've specifically done to target that problem.
I know my students are the same way. They're very generous. They think that they think things are very clear. I have had mixed results with students rating their own or each other's free response questions. I think some are better than others. Like a probability problem has a pretty straightforward rubric. Like kids can pretty much follow those. But like, for example, when you're talking about explanations, I totally get what you're saying. Like explanations where it has to be in context and it has to make sense. And even like things like directional language, when students have to say, you know, this is more likely because, and then they don't understand necessarily that it has to be that specific. So I love to go over that with the students. I mean, sometimes I talk about the rubrics like as a whole group. And one of the things I like to do is if students are giving responses, I will give their responses and I will put them on the board, or in this case on the Zoom, and we will talk about what those questions were. Are they like, is this an E, is it P? And if it is a P, why is it a P? If it's an I, why is it an I? And sometimes I'll go through and I'll say, but listen, this is a good question, or this is a good response, but it still gets an I. Why does this get an I? Right. And so sometimes I give them, and I really do just pull their responses. Right. So I think showing them that even good responses cannot get credit. And then thinking about how you can make those responses stronger. I think it's a very cognitive demanding task to have that. And I do that for a lot of things. And usually I do things like that with the place where I usually start is like when we talk about bias. That's where students have they have, you know, they answer things like, well, it's biased because it's biased. And you're like, okay. So, but yeah, I think going over student responses with other students, and it's anonymous. So, you know, I'm not calling kids out, but I think that's very helpful. But then to tell, you know, because I say, you want to know what I think about this question. It's not necessarily what you think.
So along those lines, I've been trying to put the FRQs into Desmos so the kids can grade themselves.
Yeah.
So I did a bunch of these, and then I learned how to use Desmos better. So the new template is better than the old template.
So Mike, put them in the chat.
Yeah, I'm gonna put them in. They're in two different collections right now because I'm in the process of updating the old templates to the new templates.
Yeah.
So this is the old ones that don't have the newer templates.
Okay.
But in better times, when I was in class, I could actually secure these and give these in class.
Right.
Because I could use the pacing tool to paste them on to the work slides. And then once time was up, I could paste them onto the grade slides and their work would show up on the slides with the rubrics. And so they've been grading themselves all year. I mean, I've still been using them. It's just been hard to use them in a summative way this year.
Yeah.
But
do you use the feature on Desmos where it will show other students' responses? Do you use that?
I don't.
I think that would be a really interesting way to do it too.
Yeah, I think so
for
too.
those of you who are not familiar with Desmos, there's a way that you can enable it where once students start answering the questions through the activity builder, it will allow students to see other students' responses, right, as they go.
Yeah, so it's all split up right now, as you know. I made all these and now I'm updating the template. So the newer ones, like, will move the sketch forward. I think some of the old ones, I didn't actually have their answers show up yet. So, you know, it's a process at this point.
It is, yeah.
The new ones are real nice. So if if you ever wanted to make one, you can just copy the template and just add in new problems. But I think that's been pretty effective because they've been able to grade themselves all year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a lot to go back and make sure they graded themselves in a correct way, but I think that's a strong way to at least give them an opportunity to try to grade themselves where it's all in one place and they're going through it. So just share those.
I love that. I'm going to look at that.
Hey, Amy.
Yes.
Well, first of all, Michael, don't knock yourself short because I have used some of your Desmos. So, and it's been helpful. Okay. So, and easier sometimes than creating my own. Amy, you know, in the classroom, I've done a lot of what you say where, you know, we grade each other, we talk about it, but we're mostly asynchronous. We're going hybrid shortly,
Okay.
but even hybrid, most of my kids are staying home.
Yep.
And they don't like to talk, even in the chat, unmute their mic.
Yep.
Even when you force them into like breakout groups.
Yep.
Any suggestions?
Yes. So it is a non-negotiable in my classroom. Every student needs to participate. And today, for example, I did it, and I make a mental, not just make a mental note, I actually record who participates, and I just am grading them. So if you participate, you do, you know, you get 100 or whatever it is for the day. But I'm just grading them on that. And also I'm not making it hard. You know, I'm not making it hard. The thing about it is the way that I phrase to my students is that, because sometimes the students will say, I know it, but I just don't know how to say it. And I'll say, exactly. And that is why we're practicing right now. Communicating is really hard. And I think that, especially now that we're in inference, like what is a p-value? I mean, I had a student today, it took him 5 attempts, you know, to get it correct, with my help, of course, but like, yay, that's what I mean by perseverance, right? Like, so yeah, you finally got it. I just make it a non-negotiable. I just told them it's not an option anymore, because having you practice with me is a really great practice. And I'm not going to let you get away with bad communication, whereas you might think that it's good communication, but then all of a sudden I'm telling you that it's not strong enough. You know, I kind of have the same situation as Chris, right? Where, they think they're going to get a 4 on this question. And I'm like, nope, that's a 2. That's a 2. But, tough love is sometimes the best love for them, because they need to understand when they're not getting things right. And that's actually one of the things that they talk about in Make It Stick, right? Like they need really honest feedback.
Right.
So
Thank you.
I just think you should hold them accountable, but also explain to them like why it's so important.
Okay.
And I think that, my students are actually starting to get very appreciative of it. Like because at the end of class, sometimes I have them, like today, the reflection was, what was your struggle today? Just tell me what your struggle was. And one of the students said like, oh, I'm really struggling with the conditions, but, now that I'm hearing like about how I can check this, it makes a little bit more sense to me. So make it worth it. Yeah. But in solidarity, man, I just, yeah. So Chris has some applets. Yeah. I haven't explored those. I love applets. You know which applet is one of my favorite? Is Chris Franklin's textbook applet, The Art of Stat. It's really good, Chris. I'm not even just telling you that because you're in the room. My students like it. I like it. It's really good. Chris, can you put the link to the web apps? And
yes, I will put the link in the.
It's my
in the
favorite,
chat.
Chris.
Thank you.
It's really my favorite.
It's open source and anyone is welcome
It's
to
really
use
good.
it.
I tell my students, use that over the calculator, and then when we're practicing for the exam, then use your calculator. I like it. I like that they graph it. They've got the picture. When I talk about p-value and I've got the distribution right in front of me, it's much easier. Yeah. Yeah. So Art of Stat, it's great. It's really good. All right. What other suggestions and questions do you guys have? And yeah, man, it's going to be hard. This year's going to be a hard one. I thought
Amy, I could make give you a quick story. I've been listening to the conversation about communication, calculator talk, things of that sort. I was trying to look up what year it was. The years all run together for me now. It's either 2008, I think, or 2009. You can look back at the free response questions. But there was the probability question. And it was actually started out with an expected value part, but it had 4 parts to the question.
Okay.
And I will never forget when we were looking at sample papers, we found one where a student had used some calculator talk in terms of how they were finding their probabilities.
Yeah.
They had correct answers on all 4 parts, but they didn't show work, and they only gave some calculator coding, but all correct answers. That student received a 0.
Yeah. No, I tell my students all
even
the
though
time.
they had correct answers. But then there was another paper where the student did not use any calculator talk. They wrote out all their work, and they had made a minor arithmetic mistake in part A, which threw off the answers for the rest of the question. They got a 4
I know.
because they showed all their work.
I know.
And I think that's a great example to tell the students of how important it is to communicate and to show your work. It's not about getting the right numerical answer.
Correct.
It's about showing that you understand the process.
Yeah. That's true,
Yeah.
Chris. And that's one of the things actually I really appreciate about this exam. I mean, that is a loving way to grade. And I've adapted that in my own classroom. So I have a story like that too. I had a student, she was doing, there must have been a table. Okay. So there was a table. It must have been a conditional probability problem. It must have been like, are these things independent? Something like that. She had a calculus test the period before, and her problem in the numerator had a number that was nowhere in this table. I mean, like nowhere. I couldn't even figure out like where that had come from. And what it turns out is that number was in her calculus test, and that was somehow sort of indelible in her brain. But her work was flawless. I mean, notation flawless. She had a sentence to summarize. Again, same thing, Chris. I gave her full credit. And she said, really, I didn't get anything right. I said, but you know the statistics, and it is so clear that you know the statistics. So the thing about calculator speak is, how do I know what you know in terms of the statistics?
That's right.
Right? Like, and so I tell my students that, and the other thing, Chris, is that different calculators have different formats. And it's actually one of the reasons why I actually struggle using the calculator now, because the input in R is the opposite on one of those functions, and I never get it right. So, you know, the inputs are never the same. So you have to be a little bit careful even with the notation. I think the standardized notation for normal distribution and binomial are pretty standard, but they're not. Like, for example, I was looking in my math stats textbook, and there they use normal mu sigma squared, right? Whereas in AP stats, they would use maybe normal mu sigma. So do we know if that's a sigma squared or a sigma? We don't, right? So if it's not always so standard, some textbooks use mu and some textbooks use, what's the other one? Oh no, it's p and pi, right? So even the symbols are not always standard. Yeah.
The question I was speaking about was from the 2008 exam, and I just put the link in the chat.
Well,
if anyone wants to look at that particular exam question.
I know, life lesson. But you know what? I also think like I'm preparing you for something after AP stats, right? Like you're not going to be using a TI calculator in your college courses. So, you know, learn how to do it. Yes, Chris, come on, one more question. We got you.
At least one more anyway.
Yeah, I like it.
So one of the things that my classes are, you know, sort of, I don't know if miffed is the right word, but confused by is on the inference questions, are there points awarded? So I guess the scenario has been, if you don't know how to do the question, you know, you're getting points for conditions. So you could get a P even if you don't know as long as you're doing some sort of N times P equals whatever. And then if you make up a Z and P value, and then make the right conclusion and compare it to some alpha, like you're getting 2 out of 2 on that without having any idea necessarily about how to perform the test, or how, like,
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think in terms of, you know, if you don't know,
Yep.
how do you sort of
Yeah, you guessed.
collect points?
So I'm also a math team coach, and in my math team, you always at least guess. Always. You never leave it blank. I mean, unless you really don't have time, you always try something. You know, I like what you said. Like, if you don't know how to find the statistic and the p-value, make something up, right? Or say something like, I don't know how to find this number, but whatever that number would be, this is what I would do. So I think the point is, Chris yeah, I mean, of course she has the right point, right? She knows what she's talking about, but the clear thing is that students really should try to demonstrate what they know, right? So if a student gets to a place where they get stuck, I mean, listen, if you're going to fail with style, you know, like at least give it a whirl, answer to the best of your ability, try to put it in context, use what you know, do it with style. And yes, I've seen many students who have had a question, like if I'm grading their question, I've seen a student that said something like, my calculator button is stuck, or something like that. I can't remember what they said, but this is what I think the number should be. They made a guess about what the number should be. And then they answer the question that way. And it was pretty good. I think we were able to give that student like a 2 or a 3 on the question.
I will say that try not to encourage your students, like when they're checking assumptions. And for example, if they're trying to use a box plot to verify the normality assumption, tell them not to make up a box plot, because if it's not drawn somewhat plausibly for what it should look like, they're not going to get credit for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that, but
yeah.
I've been noticing though, Chris, that they've been doing a lot where they've been giving the graph, or they've been giving such a large sample size that you wouldn't need to think about it. And I will say that on the digital exam, they won't have students graphing or anything like that. So that won't even be possible on the digital exam.
And also tell your students to read the STEM closely, because oftentimes with the inference type problems, be it confidence intervals or test of hypothesis, they'll tell you that the assumptions have actually been checked and verified. And that means that the student doesn't have to actually go through that step. And we've seen students that spend time doing that again when they could be putting their time elsewhere. So they need to really read the STEM closely.
Yep.
I always used to say too, tell your students not to make up another question to answer when they're trying to answer a question.
Answer the question and then stop.
Answer the question and then stop. And I know this is hard for students to sometimes know, but don't necessarily throw in extra information because you think that that will help you gain more points.
No.
There's been too many cases where a student is given a essentially correct answer, and then they decide to throw a little something extra into their answer, which is incorrect. And the way the AP scoring occurs, everything has to be graded. So that incorrect part then will knock their score down.
Yeah. And one other thing is students should answer the question once. So if a student gives 2 different solutions,
parallel solutions is what we call it.
Yeah, then it's not even an average. It's the lowest score, and usually it's wrong.
Yes, they grade the worst of the 2.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah, answer the question once. And so that's what I mean when I say like students should just attempt it, right? Like just do it once, try your best. And I also think that when students say that things that they don't know something, they know something, if they part A sometimes gets them going.
Tell them not to stay too long on a particular problem either.
Mhm. Yeah,
If
well,
they can come back to it. Unless it's the digital,
So I still think 10 to 12 minutes, Chris, 10 to 12 minutes on a question and 30 minutes for the investigative task.
That sounds about right. About 20, 25 at least for the investigative task.
I think 30. I know people say 10 to 25, 20 to 25. I feel like that it's worth the 30 minutes. It really is.
If you think about it with the investigative task, it's worth twice what a regular free response question is worth. So if a student can manage to pull 2 points off of an investigative task, that's the same as pulling a 4 off a regular free response question. And ideally, an investigative task, at least 2 parts of the 4 parts should hopefully be something that they have practiced many times in the course. It's typically the last 2 parts that are considered the investigative part. So,
and
so that's why
it's fun. Sometimes it's fun, like my students, it's often their favorite question because they say, "Oh, that was crazy,"
And I think students often amaze themselves at what they do with the investigative task. That when you give them the opportunity to think outside the box, they come up with very creative solutions. Yeah.
Has there been any idea about what a practice digital? So my school is not allowing a paper, or we're just saying like we may not write either the first 2 because we might not be around.
I'm doing digital, so
yeah,
students are doing digital, so I'm with you.
Yeah. Is there a practice exam in that format that might look, or that we might have a good idea what it looks like? And
so they have said on their website that they're going to, in early April, they're going to give a practice with multiple choice and free response.
okay.
So I'm going to have my students do it because it's not just the format, right? It's the interface. I really want my students to practice with that interface.
Yeah.
That relieves a lot of stress if they've done it before and they kind of know. Yeah. Because I think that's a lot of stress for students. Most of my students took an exam last year when it was, it was stressful, with upload issues and stuff like that. So hopefully, this helps alleviate some of that. Yeah. Anyway, Chris, it's 4:59.
Yes. Any last minute questions?
I will say, and maybe I didn't notice this in the past, but they were very explicit about the FRQ questions this time and the topics.
They've had that before.
Has they? All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I just thought that was assumed. I didn't know if that was actually out there.
Yeah, they started that, I think 2 years ago,
That sounds about
where they'll
right.
tell you sort of the topics. I like it, but I also, I mean, I like the surprise element of those free response too,
Well, Amy, thank you so much for leading us today. This has been a great discussion, and I know we all appreciate the information as teachers are getting ready for the month of May, which will be here sooner than we realize.
Yeah. Good luck to everybody.
My understanding is the grading is once again this year going to be all online, whether it's paper and pencil or the digital exam that's coming through. So that's going to be once again an interesting process.
Yeah, it was very efficient last year, so I'm hoping it's similarly efficient.
Well, and I hope that College Board really is sincere when they say that they hope to in 2022 get it back to in person again, because I think the reading is probably one of the most rewarding professional development opportunities for all of us.
I agree, Chris. I really agree.
That participate. And I miss seeing everybody. So I'm being selfish when I say that.
You have an important job to do at the reading too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Bubble, bubble, bubble.
All right.
Well, thank you. Thank you again, everybody. And we'll see you next month. Our next chat is going to be April the 15th. I'll be sending out a notice on it in another couple of weeks. So just tentatively mark your calendar for April 15th.
Thank you,
right.
Allie.
Bye-bye, everyone.